The baby lion's trembling paws pressed against the dry earth, its tiny form still fragile and unsure. The man's gaze softened as he watched the cub, his heart tightening with each passing moment. There was no sign of the lioness, no other lions in sight. The absence of the mother left a silent void, a question that hovered in the air. The savanna, which normally pulsed with life, now felt like a place of uncertainty, as if the land itself was holding its breath. The man moved slowly, his presence steady and calming as he extended his hand just within reach of the cub. The baby lion's large eyes locked onto his, a flicker of something almost like recognition passing through them. It was still unsure, but the distance between them was closing. The cub took another hesitant step forward, its body shaking, but its movements were no longer driven by sheer panic. It was still searching, still seeking its mother, but now it seemed to be reaching out to the man, sensing something, comfort, perhaps, or simply the presence of another living being. The man knelt lower, his knees pressing into the soft earth. His heart was heavy with a quiet sadness for the tiny creature in front of him. The cub's fur, though beautiful and golden, was matted and dirtied from its ordeal. It was small, vulnerable, and alone in the vastness of the savanna. The man knew that this was no simple encounter. This was a turning point, a life that hung in balance. Without its mother, the cub's chances of survival would be slim, and yet there was a flicker of hope as it took another small step toward him. Its breath was shallow but steady now, the initial panic subsiding. "Come here, little one," the man whispered, his voice barely a murmur in the vast silence. His words were soft, an offering of comfort, though he knew the cub wouldn't understand them. But somehow, in that moment, the soft cadence of his voice seemed to soothe the little lion. The baby lion's body twitched, as if considering its options, and then, with a tentative move, it stepped closer to the man, reaching out with its tiny paw. The man's hand hovered just above it, careful, waiting. When the cub's small paw brushed against his, the man's heart skipped a beat. A quiet connection had formed, an understanding between them that spoke volumes without words. The man slowly, carefully, lowered his hand to the cub's back, letting the tips of his fingers brush against its soft, warm fur. The touch was gentle, slow, an offering of reassurance. The cub, still unsure but trusting in its own way, let out a soft whimper. It was a sound of vulnerability, of fear, but also of longing, for safety, for its mother, for a moment of comfort. The man's hand remained steady, a calming presence in the midst of the wild. He could feel the cub's body relax slightly under his touch. The tremors in its limbs began to ease, and its breathing, once frantic, grew a little more even. But there was still an undeniable sadness in its eyes. It was clear that the cub was seeking more than just physical comfort. It was looking for something that could restore the balance of its world, something that could fill the void left by its missing mother. The man's heart ached with the weight of the moment. He wished he could offer more than just reassurance, but he knew that the cub needed far more than what he could give. The man's mind raced with thoughts of the lioness, wondering where she might be, why the cub was alone. He scanned the surrounding grasslands, but there was no sign of the pride. It was a dangerous world out there, one where even the smallest lapse in attention could lead to the loss of a life. And yet, in that moment, the man could only focus on the life in front of him, the fragile, trembling lion cub that was reaching out to him for solace. The cub nudged its head against the man's hand, the soft gesture barely perceptible but full of unspoken trust. The man's fingers stroked the cub's fur gently, his heart heavy with a deep, quiet emotion. He didn't know how long they would remain in this moment, but he felt the urgency of the situation. The cub needed its mother, needed to be with the pride, to be nurtured and protected. But for now it was alone. The man stood slowly, still watching the cub. It was now resting its head against his hand, a small sigh escaping its lips. "Just a little more, little one," the man whispered, his words carrying the weight of hope. The savanna around them seemed to hold its breath, the wind picking up just enough to rustle the tall grasses around them. The lion cub, still weak but no longer frantic, looked up at the man. Its eyes, filled with uncertainty and pain, now held something else: trust. In the soft connection between them, the man knew that this fragile creature had just been given a chance for survival, a chance for something more. The baby lion took a step back, still cautious but stronger now, and the man's heart filled with a quiet sense of resolve. The moment, fragile as it was, held a power that went beyond words. It was the kind of connection that would stay with him long after this day, as the savanna's endless cycle continued ever so quietly. The world, for that brief moment, felt like it had paused. The man watched the cub, knowing he had done what he could. And as the cub turned its head back toward the tall grass, its small body shaking less now, the man couldn't help but think that perhaps this was a step towards something bigger, something that was not yet clear but felt like it was waiting on the horizon. The savanna stretched out endlessly, the soft rustling of the dry grass the only sound in the stillness. The man kept his gaze fixed on the cub, now lying near him, its small body exhausted from the effort of trying to move. The baby lion had settled beside him, its legs curled beneath it in a position of defeat. Its breathing was shallow, the soft rise and fall of its chest the only sign of life. The man's heart ached for the tiny creature, so vulnerable, so far from the protection of its mother. The more he observed the cub, the more he realized just how fragile it was. The first signs of true exhaustion were evident, and each passing minute brought the realization that time was running out. The lioness, the cub's protector, was nowhere to be found. The man rose slowly, his movements deliberate. He had to find her. The sun hung low in the sky now, casting long shadows over the savanna, but there was no time to stop. The man couldn't leave the cub alone. He couldn't abandon it to whatever danger might be lurking in the wild. He needed to understand why the lioness had not returned. Perhaps she was injured. Perhaps she had been forced to leave the area in search of food. Whatever the reason, the uncertainty gnawed at him. With every step he took, he scanned the horizon. The land seemed to stretch out forever, offering no answers, only an overwhelming sense of isolation. There were no fresh tracks, no sign of any other lions nearby. His breath caught in his chest as he walked deeper into the savanna, hoping to catch a glimpse of movement, anything that might signal the presence of the lioness. The cub, though tired, was still following him. It tottered along behind, its little body struggling to keep up. Each step seemed harder than the last. The man stopped, crouching down once more. He called out softly to the cub, "Stay with me." It was a futile effort, but it brought a brief pause to the cub's movements. For a moment, it looked up at him, its large eyes full of confusion and longing. Then, with a soft whimper, the cub collapsed once again, this time completely still, its tiny body resting against the earth. The man felt his heart tighten. Every moment mattered now. He couldn't risk waiting any longer. The cub needed more than just the man's presence. It needed its mother, or the help of someone who could provide the care it desperately required. But the savanna, in all its vastness, remained silent, offering no answers. The man glanced back at the cub, still motionless on the ground. He didn't know what to do next, but he knew he couldn't leave. After a few moments of hesitation, he rose once again, looking around for any sign of the lioness. The harsh reality of the situation pressed down on him. He could feel the weight of the task ahead, but the fear of losing the cub lingered. Without its mother, the cub's chances of survival in the wild were slim. He would not let it be alone. His voice, quiet and steady, reached the cub again. "We're not going anywhere. Stay close." He knelt down beside it, lifting it gently back into his arms, trying to offer what comfort he could. The cub's body was light in his arms, but the warmth of its fragile form pressed against his chest, reminding him of how much was at stake. The man stood, still cradling the cub, his thoughts racing. He would need to move fast, make decisions based on whatever chance he had left to save this small, helpless creature. He couldn't let it down now. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, the man looked up at the expanse of the savanna. The land felt wide, empty, almost mocking in its quietness, and yet he refused to give in to the feeling of helplessness creeping up on him. He would search. He would fight for this cub, even if the answers didn't come immediately. In this vast, silent world, the connection between the man and the cub felt deeper than anything the savanna had to offer. Time was slipping away, but for now they were not alone. The man remained by the cub's side, his hand gently brushing its small back. His eyes, though focused on the fragile creature in front of him, constantly scanned the horizon, searching for any sign of the lioness. A soft breeze stirred the tall grasses around them, but the air felt heavy, laden with the silence of waiting. The cub's body had grown unnervingly still, its earlier tremors subsiding, but the stillness now felt unnatural. The man's heart tightened as he considered the possibilities. The mother had not returned, and the longer they waited, the more uncertain the situation became. The savanna around him was quiet, almost too quiet, and in this silence, his concern deepened. Time felt like it was slipping away, and the longer the cub remained without its mother, the more vulnerable it became. The weight of his thoughts was interrupted by a slight movement in the grass. At first it was just a rustling, soft and barely noticeable. But then, through the tall blades, two small figures appeared, emerging cautiously from the shadows, the cubs. They were small, their movements tentative as they took hesitant steps through the thick grass. Their tiny bodies wobbled with each step, unsteady, as if unsure of what to do next. The man's breath caught in his throat as he watched them approach. The sight of them, so fragile, so innocent, pulled at his heart. The cub's wide eyes scanned the landscape, filled with the same confusion he had seen in the first cub. They were searching, driven by instinct, but it was clear they did not yet understand the gravity of the situation. The man remained still, allowing them to approach, not wanting to startle them. His heart raced with a mixture of awe and apprehension. The cub's tiny, uncertain steps brought them closer to their mother, who lay vulnerable, still struggling against the pain in her body. Their small bodies trembled as they neared her, guided by instinct rather than understanding. The first cub stopped a few feet from the lioness, its eyes wide, its ears flicking nervously. The second cub, slightly bolder, took a few more steps forward. They were unsure, but their need for their mother's presence outweighed their fear. The man watched as the cubs paused, their tiny forms barely visible in the tall grasses. The savanna, once so quiet, now seemed to hold its breath, as if the land itself recognized the significance of this moment. The lioness, still lying in the dirt, stirred slightly. Her massive body trembled under the weight of her wound, and for a moment she appeared to struggle to lift her head. But then her amber eyes softened as they focused on her cubs, and something changed in the air. The man could see it. There was a shift, a quiet strength returning to her. Her gaze locked onto the cubs, and the tenderness in her eyes was undeniable. She could not rise fully, not yet, her body still weakened by the injury. But in that moment, the bond between mother and cub was palpable, undeniable. Her eyes, filled with warmth and recognition, softened as she looked at them, as though telling them, "I am still here." The cubs, now more certain of their surroundings, moved closer. The first cub, still hesitant, nudged its mother gently with its tiny head. The second cub followed, stepping closer and then touching its little body to hers. The lioness responded with a subtle shift, her side gently brushing against them, reaffirming the connection that had been temporarily severed. The world around them seemed to pause as the cubs continued to nuzzle their mother, their tiny bodies brushing against her side. Despite the strain of her injury, the lioness was still their protector, still their mother. It was a moment of quiet resolution, an affirmation of the bond between them, forged not just through birth, but through shared survival, even in the face of adversity. The man, feeling the weight of the moment, stayed as still as possible, letting the family have their moment. There was no need to intrude. His role had been to help, but this was their time, their reunion. The bond between the lioness and her cubs had endured the hardship of the savanna, the cruelty of nature, and now it was being quietly renewed. The man's chest tightened with a mixture of relief and sorrow as he realized how fragile this moment was, how fleeting it could be. The cubs were here, with their mother, but the journey ahead would still be fraught with danger. And yet, in this quiet exchange, there was a strength that transcended the physical struggles they faced. They were together again, and that was enough for now. The lioness, still weakened by her injury, responded to her cubs with a quiet tenderness that seemed to transcend the pain of her body. As she shifted her large frame, her muscles trembling under the strain, there was no attempt to rise fully. She was still too fragile, but her eyes, those deep amber eyes, never wavered from her cubs. Despite the exhaustion that clung to her, there was an unmistakable fierceness in her gaze. It was the kind of protection that could not be broken, even by the most severe of injuries. It was the look of a mother who, even in the face of her own vulnerability, would do everything to shield her young. Her eyes spoke volumes, silent words that only the cubs could understand. "I am still here," they seemed to say. "I will protect you." The cubs, sensing her closeness, grew bolder. Their tiny bodies, still fragile but full of instinct, began to press against her side, seeking warmth, comfort, and the reassurance only a mother can give. The first cub nudged her gently with its small nose, and the second followed, stepping closer, their little bodies a quiet affirmation of their bond. The lioness responded, her body shuddering slightly as she leaned into their touch, offering them what strength she could. The cubs, no longer hesitant, began to nuzzle against her fur, their small, soft bodies seeking the comfort they had longed for. The reunion was simple, tender, and completely unhurried. No frantic movements, no rush, just the slow, steady rhythm of life returning. The man, watching from a distance, felt the quiet tension in the air shift. It wasn't the kind of tension that had hung over them before, one of uncertainty and fear, but rather a deep, quiet understanding. The lioness and her cubs were together again, their bond unbroken despite the trials they had faced. Her condition was still dire, but in this moment, with her cubs beside her, she was whole again. The man could see the way her body had relaxed, just a little, under the weight of their touch. Her head, still heavy, rested gently against the cubs as they nestled closer, their small forms curling up beside her. It was a simple, quiet act, but it spoke of something profound, that in the wild, survival was not just about strength, but about connection, trust, and care. The man's chest tightened with emotion as he watched this reunion unfold. He had done all he could, but now he knew his role was coming to an end. He had been a part of this moment, this fragile and beautiful moment of healing, but it was no longer his place to intrude further. The cubs were with their mother now, safe in the comfort of her presence. The wild had a way of taking care of its own, and the man understood that the lioness, despite her injury, was fully capable of caring for her young. The tension that had once weighed heavily on him began to lift, replaced by a quiet sense of peace. He stood still, his breath slow, allowing the lioness and her cubs the space to find their rhythm. The savanna around them seemed to hold its breath too, as if giving them the time they needed. The man had provided what help he could, but now it was time for nature to do what it always did best: heal, restore, and continue. He knew he had witnessed something rare and fragile, a moment that could never be recreated. As the lioness and her cubs began to settle together, the man turned slowly and stepped back, his heart full of gratitude for the privilege of having shared in their story. The cubs were safe with their mother. That was all that mattered now. The man knew without a doubt that this was where he needed to leave them, in the wild, where they belonged. The cubs' soft breathing, the lioness's steady presence, and the quiet of the savanna around them marked the end of the man's role in their journey. With one final glance, he walked away, leaving the family to find their way forward, knowing that his small part in their survival had been enough. And as the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows over the savanna, the man knew he would carry this moment with him always. The bond between mother and cub, tender and unyielding, would remain in his heart forever. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the savanna. The sky was painted in muted shades of pink and orange, a soft glow that bathed the earth in warmth. The man stood still, his eyes fixed on the lioness as she slowly attempted to rise. Every movement was slow, deliberate, as she struggled to regain her footing. Her body trembled slightly, the marks of her injuries still visible, but there was a quiet strength in the way she pushed herself upward. The cubs, small and still unsteady, remained close to her, their tiny forms brushing gently against her in silent support. They too felt the weight of the moment. Their trust in their mother was evident in their soft movements. The man watched them, feeling a quiet sense of relief wash over him. After all they had been through, they were moving, slowly but steadily, toward the wild once more. The lioness had found her strength again, and with it her cubs were no longer alone. They were returning to where they belonged. The lioness paused for a moment, her amber eyes meeting the man's gaze. There was no word spoken, no grand gesture, just a steady, soft acknowledgement that passed between them. In that moment, the man understood. This was a bond formed in the quietest of ways, a bond that required no explanation. It was a bond born from trust, from care, and from the shared experience of survival. The lioness, with a gentle movement, turned her head away and began to lead her cubs into the tall grasses. Her body swayed slightly with each step, the rhythm of the wild guiding her forward. The cubs followed closely, their movements still unsure, but filled with the knowledge that they were not alone. The man remained still, his heart full as he watched them disappear into the vastness of the savanna, swallowed by the endless expanse of grass. The man did not move, his gaze never leaving the place where they had been. The lioness and her cubs had found their way back. They were no longer in need of his help, and as they walked away, the man understood that they were home. He had played his part, and now the wild would carry them forward. The sun, now dipping below the horizon, cast a final golden glow over the land. The air was still, the world holding its breath for a brief moment. The savanna had returned to its rhythm, the distant calls of birds and the rustling of the grass marking the continuity of life. The man exhaled slowly, the weight of the moment settling deep in his chest. This was not the end of a story, but the beginning of another chapter in the wild. The lioness and her cubs had vanished from view, but the connection, the quiet bond they had shared, would remain. The man turned slowly, his steps light, but his heart heavy with the peace that comes from knowing that life had found its way again. The world around him continued, but in that moment everything felt right. The savanna, vast and eternal, would carry on as it always had, but for the man, this moment, this quiet, simple miracle, would stay with him forever. The land was alive again, and so too were the animals that roamed it. And as he walked away, the wind whispered through the grass, the world moving on, as it always would, in its silent, unbroken rhythm.